Hey everybody, Harv here. Let's get into our second part of our lecture with the Soviet Union. So yesterday we were talking about Lenin, that new economic plan. Okay, today I'm going to focus a little bit more on Stalin, all right, and Stalinism. Now, Lenin, right, we talked about Lenin yesterday. He had his new economic plan. We saw the Soviet Union consolidating power and kind of just growing up and figuring out how to control the whole of the Soviet Union and kind of recover from the Russian Revolution and the cataclysm of World War I. Well, Lenin dies. Okay, he's going to have a stroke, and he will die a couple years later. And so you're going to see some jockeying for power. And there's two factions that are going to emerge from this. It's Trotsky and Stalin. It's two individuals who are going to be fighting for power. Now, when Lenin was dying, Lenin wrote in a memoir about kind of his personal feelings on the major figures within the Communist Party. And he didn't necessarily like both. He didn't really like Trotsky or Stalin, but he favored Trotsky over Stalin to take over. And he considered Stalin to be brutal, rude, cruel, and just not fit to lead the Soviet Union. And so Lenin supported Trotsky, but Stalin is going to somehow figure out how to take over. Okay, and we're going to talk about that. Now, each faction, Stalin and Trotsky, wanted control of the Soviet Union, and they're going to fight over this. And they both had differing visions of how they wanted the Soviet Union to look. Trotsky, he wanted rapid industrialization, and he wanted voluntary collectivization for agriculture. Now, I really want to quickly talk about what collectivization is. Collectivization is when the government takes over all of agriculture. It's when you have communist government agriculture, and so Trotsky wanted to make that voluntary. And what he's trying to do is, be cool with the peasants, much like Lenin did. All right, Trotsky's going to make it voluntary. So he's saying, hey, farmers, if you want to have your own farms, that's cool. All right, you can have your own private farms. But if you want to join our giant collective farms, you can do that as well. So he's giving them the option. Okay? He also wanted the Soviet Union, and this was very Marxist of him. This is very much in the eyes of Karl Marx. He wanted the Soviet Union to encourage a worldwide socialist revolution. So he wanted it to go global. Stalin is not going to want that. He's going to want it to stay just in Russia. Okay? At first, Stalin will change a little bit later, but right now, that's kind of what Trotsky's initial feelings are, and I'll get to Stalin's in a second. Okay? Let me tell you about Joseph Stalin, okay? He was about 5'5". He had like really bad pox, like acne scars on his face. It wasn't from acne though, it was from smallpox. He was really conscientious about his size, so he wore lifts in his shoes. He grew up with an alcoholic father who would beat him regularly, and his mother violently, very violent. There's a lot of violence in his household. And Stalin grew up with that. He grew up in fear. He grew up with cruelty, with brutality, violence. And we're gonna see that manifest in the way that he rules. Stalin is gonna be this paranoid, brutal, terrorizing, fear-mongering leader, and a lot of it is due to what he was raised in. And you will see that. I mean, Stalin, in my opinion, is going to be worse than Hitler. He will kill millions of his own people. I think the figures are, I've heard anywhere from 20 million to 50 million of his own people he kills via starvation, execution, torture. And so this is Stalin, okay? Now, Stalin also is a gifted listener. Okay, and he's also very fake with people in the sense that Stalin listens. Stalin gets a really good understanding of people. It's going to be very different from Hitler. Hitler and Mussolini were these great speakers who would inspire people. That's not Stalin's style. Stalin was very good at listening to people, understanding people, and manipulating people. And Stalin will be very good at hiding his true intentions, hiding his true feelings. and keeping that from people. And so we'll see him ally with some people and in order to get Trotsky out, and then he's just going to kill his allies. And they never saw it coming. Well, Stalin was always hiding his true intentions. So that's Joseph Stalin. He was the general secretary. Let's highlight that, please. Okay, and that allowed him to amass a lot of power. Okay, that was a position that allowed him to get to know a lot of people, to make some connections. And if you know people and you have a lot of connections, you're able to get some power. Okay, and he was very manipulative. In order to get Trotsky out, Trotsky was clearly the front runner, clearly the favorite to take over for Lenin. He is going to manipulate and unite Trotsky's enemies against Trotsky and manipulate them all to kind of help him get Trotsky out, and then he's going to get them out and kill them. So he's going to kill Trotsky and kill some of these allies to help him get Trotsky out, and shows you his manipulative, his way of doing things. He's very violent. He's very fake with people and very manipulative with people. Okay, Stalin. An example of that was with Nikolai Bukharin. Nikolai Bukharin did not get along with Trotsky. And you're going to see Stalin say, hey, Nikolai, you don't like Trotsky. I don't like Trotsky. Let's unite and get some other people on our team and we can kick Trotsky out. And that's what he did. And then Stalin turns on Nikolai Bukharin and some of his allies and has them killed. Stalin, to go back to this, Stalin opposed Trotsky's position of a worldwide revolution. He believed that Marxism could exist in Russia alone. Stalin did agree with rapid industrialization, and we'll talk about that. And then Stalin also disagreed with Trotsky over collectivization. We're going to see Stalin wants to make it mandatory for everybody to be on a collective. It's not voluntary. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. Okay? Stalin, like I've alluded to, is going to have Trotsky humiliated and exiled and have him murdered with an ice pick in 1940 in Mexico. And so that just shows you Stalin's way of doing things. Brutal, violent, manipulative. It's how he gets things done. And that's going to be very much a theme of Stalin. Now it's going to be good for him to get power, but we're going to see it kind of backfire with his purges in World War II. And I'll get to that because we're going to see Stalin just purge the army of generals and officers and officials. And when the Nazis invade, he's going to say, who's going to lead the army? And everyone's going to say, well, you killed them all, so you got to pick somebody, all right? And Stalin's going to he's not going to have a lot of generals, or he's not going to have a lot of people to pick because he's killed them all. Okay? Industrialization, ladies and gentlemen. Stalin's nickname is the Man of Steel. This is huge, ladies and gentlemen, and you need to write this down in your notes. Stalin is responsible for finally getting Russia fully caught up on an industrial level with the rest of the world. We saw in the late 1800s, Russia was, with under Count Witte, Russia was starting to industrialize. They were still behind. Stalin catches them up on with industrialization. Okay, so in the late 1920s, the Communist Party is going to start to industrialize. And we are going to see, ladies and gentlemen, Joseph Stalin completely abandon the new economic policy. This is huge, ladies and gentlemen. He is going to completely reject capitalism. That is a huge contrast with Lenin. You need to know that. That's a trap multiple choice question. I don't know if there's going to be SAQs on our AP test this year with the coronavirus going on. But if you see Joseph Stalin and Lenin, and they talk about their economic policies, you have to know that Lenin favored some capitalism. Stalin is going to be a pure Marxist. No capitalism with Joseph Stalin. Okay? And Joseph Stalin's goal was to outproduce the United States, Britain, Germany, France, to outproduce them and create an industrial juggernaut. And that is his main goal, ladies and gentlemen. So he is going to call for a rapid construction of heavy industry, iron, steel, electricity generating machines, chemicals, oil, automobiles. They are going to, heavy industry, heavy industrialization, roads. He's going to industrialize weaponry. You name it, they're going to industrialize in it. And so we are going to see, finally, the Soviet Union industrialized on a massive scale. And how he did it, ladies and gentlemen, was through, again, highlighter out, his 5-year plans. You have got to know that it was through 5-year plans. That is huge. Now, there's a serious weakness, though, within the 5-year plans, ladies and gentlemen. A serious weakness, okay? A weakness within this whole industrialization is going to be the fact that you're going to see the officials who are in charge of this lie a lot about their quotas and their goals and how much they're industrializing. And it's going to be because they're so scared of not meeting Joseph Stalin's expectations that they're going to lie about how much they're producing or how much they're making. And so Joseph Stalin's never... You're going to see Russia's going to industrialize and the Soviet Union's going to industrialize, but it's going to be very inefficient going to be because if people don't meet... Joseph Stalin sets these unrealistic expectations, and people are going to try their best to industrialize, but if they don't meet his expectations or they don't meet these impossible expectations, they'll be killed. And so you're going to see the Soviet Union industrializing, but they're really not going to know how much they're making or what's going on, because a lot of the officials are going to be lying on how much they're producing or how much they're making. It's because they're scared about being killed by Joseph Stalin. So that's something I want you all to think about, is the efficiency of this. It's not going to be the most efficient industrialization. It's because so many officials are just going to be lying and saying, "Oh, we're making 1 million tons of steel" or something like that, and they're saying these outrageous claims and they're outproducing their goals, and it's because they're so scared of Joseph Stalin. So that was something I want you to keep in mind over these 5-year plans and the psychology of many of these officers who are in charge. The state commission, the Gosplan, is going to oversee the economy, and they're going to set these goals for production that a lot of people, and they're going to be these really high goals. And you're going to see a lot of officials lie about them meeting these expectations, and they're so scared about being killed by Stalin. You're going to see, ladies and gentlemen, for the first time, and we're going to see this, the first genuine working class start to arise in Russia, in the Soviet Union. So, it's what, the 1920s, 1930s, they're only 100 years behind Great Britain and the rest of the world doing this, but we finally see there on a massive scale the own Russian proletariats, the own working class, and it's gonna be very ironic because this Russian proletariat on a massive scale is going to be experiencing those tough conditions that Marx and Engels critiqued in the 1848 Communist Manifesto. Now, I don't want you to get confused. There was industrial workers in the early 1900s, in the late 1800s, as we saw Russia, the Russian Empire, industrialize. But we're seeing this for the first time, ladies and gentlemen, on a massive scale. I just want to let you all know that, okay, and make sure that we understand that, okay? The economy is going to grow 400% during this time, and we are seeing the Soviet Union, okay, become an economic giant and an economic industrial power. And guess what? They're going to need it, okay, because the Nazis are coming for them, all right? And they're going to need tanks, all the steel, all that oil. They're going to need all of that stuff. And it's because, all right, war is coming, and they're going to need it. They're going to need it, all right? And we're going to see massive factories just like this one pop up all over the Soviet Union. All right, let's talk about agriculture, okay? Now, a big problem with the new economic plan, ladies and gentlemen, was the government price for grain was lower than how it was selling, out in the rest of the, common grain market, okay? And so peasants really didn't have an incentive to sell grain because they weren't making a lot of money, and there actually wasn't a lot of incentive to cultivate grain because they weren't making a lot of money. And so what we're going to start to see is famine and food production go down, and it's because there wasn't. If the new economic plan was messing with the price of grain and lowering it, well, farmers aren't making a lot of money, and there's not much incentive. If they're not making a lot of money producing all this grain, there's not a lot of incentive to produce in the first place. So you're going to start to see famine, and that's going to be a big, a common theme throughout the entire Soviet Union, all the way up until 1991. Is there's always going to be these food shortages in the Soviet Union. Okay, now what Stalin's going to do is Stalin took a really aggressive approach with the former serfs, now the peasants, the freed peasantry, farmers, and he believed, and just shows his paranoia. That peasant holdings were too small, and then he also believed that a lot of peasants were hoarding grains on their farms. Okay, and so he's going to force the Russian peasants to give up their private farms and work on the collectives, these large farms owned by the state. Okay, this is a big contrast with Lenin. We are seeing Stalin be aggressive, be confrontational with the peasants. That's very different from Lenin, correct? Lenin was very, peaceful. Lenin was very, he worked with them. He gave them land, all right? He let them farm for profit, even though he kind of messed with the price of grain. Important for us to see that difference. Stalin is going to go after them, and he's going to murder millions of them, okay? So he's going to put the Communist Party in charge of the farming sector of the Soviet Union, okay? And he believed that this policy would end this hoarding of grain and produce enough food domestically. So what we're going to see is dekulakization. We are going to see the removal of peasants. We're going to see the peasants lose their farms, lose all that grain, lose their land, lose their livestock, lose all their equipment. That's going to be taken by the government, okay? And we're going to see a lot of them resist this. Like, this is ours. We just got it. You can't do this, Stalin. And Stalin's the worst person to say no to, the worst person to mess with. And this is going to lead to tons of violence. We're going to see millions of peasants resist this by, killing their livestock, burning their fields, destroying their equipment, and Stalin's going to say, "Well, I can fight fire with fire," and he's going to kill millions of them. He's going to imprison them. He's going to exile them to the gulags, which are their version of concentration camps in Siberia, labor camps to work them to death. And he's also going to starve these farmers to death. And we're going to see this big time in the Ukraine. Let's highlight that. It's in the western territory of the Soviet Union. We're going to see Stalin starve them. Because we're going to see on these big collectives, these farmers making all this food, and Stalin's simply not going to give them enough to survive on and feed them. We're going to see huge famine in the farming sector of the Ukraine, which was one of the biggest farming sectors of the Soviet Union. It got so bad that there's going to be cannibalism. You're going to see people eating their kids. Brutal and awful. This is going to be harsh in the Ukraine, and Stalin is going to exile anybody who doesn't follow him, who doesn't support him, and this whole collectivization, this forced collectivization, is going to end up killing millions of people via starvation, via forced labor in the gulags in Siberia. It's going to be an awful process. Okay. Now, Stalin's also going to go after the Russian Orthodox Church. The Communist Party was largely opposed to religion, and Stalin's opposed to anybody who might threaten his power, and a lot of people are part of the church, and so Stalin's going to target the church, and he's going to kill priests, he's going to destroy churches, and he is going to just destroy this institution that could potentially challenge his faith. And remember, this is the Greek Orthodox Church, okay? So by about 1937, 50% of all the priests are pretty much murdered, killed, and by 1937, 90% of the grain is collectivized. All right, farmers no longer had any say what to produce. They have no control over the farming industry at all. It is completely ruled by the government. Okay, the government supplied their seed, it supplied the equipment, it determined the payment. Stalin controlled all the farms, but a big problem with this is that because he did this, he determined all this, and people were so salty, especially the peasants, about him taking their land. There's not going to be a lot of production. He's going to have a hard time producing enough food, and part of the reason is there was an incentive for the farmers to work really hard because, they're like, I get paid the same, whether I produce a lot or I don't. So we're going to see, and that's just going to be a theme, and I talked about that. That's going to be a big theme just throughout the Soviet Union. Is they're going to have huge famines because they're going to have a hard time providing food, and that's just because there's not the most incentive for workers to work their hardest or be really efficient when it comes to farming. Okay, and here we see some peasants with their pitchforks. It looks like they're protesting, and here we see some propaganda about the collectives. Okay, many of them don't look too happy in this picture. Okay, the purges. Let's get out a highlighter and highlight the purges. This showcases, ladies and gentlemen, just the absolute paranoia of Joseph Stalin. Okay, now in 1933, and this is going to be really similar to Hitler. Hitler's going to do this, but he's not going to do this to his military like Stalin does. We're going to see Stalin start purging any of his enemies, both real and imagined. I mean, Stalin is going to go just insane. And anybody who he even thinks, even if they're innocent, anybody who even thinks of threatening his power, he is going to have them killed. Okay? And so he is just going to go on this massive killing spree. One of the first people he kills is the party chief, Sergei Kirov, all right? And he is Stalin is just going to start killing thousands of people in his party, millions of people around the country, okay? And he's doing this to purge the Communist Party of anybody who threatens him, but to also preserve his power. And he's just going to go, he has this insatiable thirst for power, but this paranoia within that. I mean, he's going to kill people, he's going to kill their families, he's going to kill their extended families. I mean, it's just this paranoia of Stalin, okay? And that's a really good word to characterize Stalin, just the paranoia, okay? He's going to put many Soviet leaders on show trials to instill this fear among them. And what a show trial is pretty much where it's just like this big public trial, and to instill fear among the people. But it really isn't a trial. The verdict was already pretty much determined, guilty. All right, very much like Louis XVI, right? With the when he's executed, they already had kind of determined that. So we're gonna put many Soviet leaders going to be put on trial. And we're just going to see many, ex-Soviet leaders, along with a lot of other Soviet leaders in the Communist Party, are just going to be put on these show trials and executed. And many are going to confess the crimes that they did not commit, and part of that's through torture. We're going to see false confessions through torture. But also, Stalin is going to be sitting there like, if you don't confess, I'm going to go to your house right now. I'm going to kill your whole family, your wife and your children, and I'm going to kill their family as well. And so these leaders who are being tortured, or, who Stalin wants a confession of, will be like, all right, I did it. Just don't hurt my family. Stalin would kill them too. Okay. Stalin would stay up late at night with his execution list and just order executions. Even if people are completely innocent, he's just going to be executing. And that's a big theme. And like I said before, he's going to kill an estimated 20 at the end of his reign. Okay, in the 1950s, he kills an estimated 20 to 50 million of his own people himself. Pretty staggering. I mean, people say Hitler. Okay, Hitler did kill millions of people, but I mean, I think the Holocaust is around 6 or 7 million people. 50 million, 20 million for Stalin, anywhere around there. That's just outrageous. Okay, now. Huge, ladies and gentlemen. Here we go. This is big, okay? After he purges his party, Stalin is going to turn to the military, the Navy, okay, and start purging them. He fears their power. He fears that there could be an army coup like Napoleon, okay? And he fears that. So he's going to start purging his generals, his officers, and start killing them. Ladies and gentlemen, this is going to be a huge problem in World War II because the Nazis attack. We're going to see Stalin go, all right, we got to defend ourselves. And he's going to be like, where are the generals? And his Communist Party, who's still alive, is going to be like, they're all dead. And Stalin's going to be like, oh, he kills the majority of his most capable commanders and generals and officers. And that is going to really backfire on him when the Nazis invade. That's a huge problem for him. ladies and gentlemen, and that's really going to come back and haunt him in World War II. We're going to see that the Nazis just completely annihilate the Soviets until the Russian winter comes in, and part of the reason is their army there's a big lack of leadership, and it's because, well, many of the leaders are dead. Okay, so this, ladies and gentlemen, I mean, so many motives for these purges. It was paranoia, his fear. Okay, but he's settling old scores. He's increasing his power, eliminating any opposition. All right, but this again just represents that paranoia. Paranoia is the word to really characterize Stalin. And remember, this is the way that he grew up, with this fear, violence. This is how Stalin. This is naturally coming to him as his form of leadership. Is this fear, this violence, this paranoia. Okay. Now, something that's really important for you all to understand is that we're going to see the Communist Party move away, his Communist Party move away from Lenin, and he's going to start cooperating with the far right fascists of Germany. And this is a really important point I wanted to make to y'all before I end this lecture, is that Stalin, as terrible and as cruel as he was, and as vicious and as paranoid, he was scared of Hitler. And I hope that gives you some idea of how gnarly Hitler was. And he's going to move to cooperate with Hitler and the Nazis because Stalin was scared of him. And I hope that gives you an idea about how gnarly Hitler was. Okay, how scary Hitler is going to be. Stalin was even scared of him. We're talking about this guy who's murdering millions and millions of people, and he was scared of Hitler. We're going to talk about that. That's really important. Okay, and the big saying when it comes to Stalin and Hitler's relationship is the fox, Stalin, is going to get outfoxed by the other fox, Hitler. And we're going to see that play out. Stalin's going to try to be friends with Hitler, and then Hitler's going to, boom, he's going to turn on him and eventually invade the Soviet Union in World War II. Okay? All right, we'll end that lecture right there, ladies and gentlemen, and we are going to talk a little bit later about fascism in Italy and in Nazi Germany. Hope everybody's doing okay.